This is Beyond the Matrix, Introduction to the Real, Season 3, Chapter 7. In this episode, we will be talking about how the other within the community of identity fashions a particular identity for a person, manifesting as a projection, according to the integration of the impulses of a person. The interrelation of distinct phases of identity, beginning within the impulses which inure inside the intersubjective space, transmuting to spatial and relational orientations of the other, generates the particular language which is assigned to a self as an archetypal role. In other words, the unity of consciousness by form, starting with impulse, extending into spatial and relational orientations, is a distinct principle from the all in all. The very substance of existence, its particular structure and orientations, manifests within every impulse, extending into the intersubjective space. The opposite is also true, for there is codependency between the forms of consciousness, the within being the without, and so on and so forth. All of this is to say that the particular constellation of spatial objects, including people, oriented to some self, is a reflection of their impulses, but not according to the essence, but rather the realness of them, the substance. In other words, it is the substance of an impulse which generates a particular arrangement or constellation of the other, not the name for the form. The name for the form is a mere appendage, an additive, which permits the other to consciously express the particular constellation in a verbal sense. To be clear, there is something intrinsic about an impulse which generates a corresponding constellation of the other. Something which is then labeled by the other to bring it into conscious actualization. But the form of the label is actually rather meaningless in and of itself, because it does not change the underlying substance, the intrinsic quality of the impulse, from which the constellation generates. This is not to say that essence is irrelevant. It represents the actualization of the self within the other, created by an affirmational quality to verbalization. Thus, we see that the 9 dialogues, reliant upon the language of form, do not structure the system, rather it is the intrinsic quality of the impulses themselves. Which is say that, the 9 dialogues are a conscious apprehension of something which is beyond form, underlying form, through the verbalization of which the self is actualized in the other. But merely giving a name to something, does not change its essential nature, which generates the arrangement of conscious beings for each other, manifesting the real, according to the intrinsic quality of our impulses. This means that the manifestation of the real in the other precedes the conscious apprehension supplanting it. This makes sense since we know that social tension generates verbalization, according to a supplied rationalization. Which means that the very particular arrangement of the other, intermingled with the impulse itself, provides merely an opportunity for the assigning of form, our impulses being a manifestation of that tension in the other. Now, when I say that the intrinsic qualities of an impulse determines the manifestation of the other, what I am saying is that our reactive responses to those impulses determines their content. For example, some may seek to conceal their impulses. This reflects an intrinsic quality of self-consciousness, awareness of the other, which produces a given arrangement of the other. This arrangement then generates tension, which compels verbalization according to the assigned rationalization. Suffice it to say, if we could identify the classes of the intrinsic qualities of our impulses, i.e. self-consciousness, capriciousness, as an example, etc., we could determine both our relation to the other and their particular constellation, according to how those self-same qualities manifest in their particularity. That's the end of the podcast for today. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment and subscribe.